a demonstration on preparing a Rubylith stencil for screen printing, as well as how to coat and expose a screen. So as with any print, it's always good to start with a sketch. This is a poster that I am making for an informal lecture series with a couple friends. So again, start with a sketch. I planned out my lines here. For this project, we're going to be doing two colors that are transparent with areas that overlap to create a third color. So again, I always like to over-plan. So here I have started to think about areas where I want color. I'm just using this kind of see-through tracing paper, vellum. So I planned out, okay, these are areas that I want pink, but I do want them to overlap with areas that are this kind of like teal color. And so the areas where they overlap are going to, depending on what color they are, if it's like light blue and pink, we'll make a purple. If it's this teal and like peach, it might make this kind of like weird muddy green, but it could look interesting. You can see I've overlapped it here so that the wine spilling into her mouth is going to be that teal or muddy purple color. The eye will be that color. This speech bubble here. So trying to even out areas where they overlap, because that will make it a little bit more visually interesting. I think it's always really clever the way that people can use two colors to create three. It's just really satisfying as an image. So challenge yourself. Think about places where your screen can overlap. You know, it could be two completely different images that overlap, and that kind of like interest that happens in the colors that overlap. So, you know, it's good to kind of plan it out. I have vellum if you want to kind of figure out where they're overlapping so you can know exactly what's going to happen. So once you've planned everything out, you're ready to create your stencil. For these stencils, we're going to be using this industrial material called Rubylith. It's made by a company called Ulano, and it has two sheets of like transparent polyester. One is clear and one is red. So if you kind of like peel up one side, you'll see that that red layer on top is really thin, and then there's a clear layer underneath. So this transparent layer is completely transparent, and the transparent red will actually block the light from our UV exposure unit. So what we're going to do is like plan out, again, using this as a guide, and cut away the areas that we don't want to expose and leave the red of the Rubylith in areas that we do want it to expose. So it's nice because this is actually transparent, and it involves this cutting technique that can be kind of tedious, but I think gives a really beautiful result, because unlike a hand-drawn stencil, you know, you have to kind of mess with the film. It has these like cut edges. You can also expose screens with like cut pieces of paper. So this sort of like makes a stencil that sticks together so that all the pieces don't have to like be attached. It creates these like areas of color that are attached by this clear sheet of plastic. So basically, you'll always want to make sure that the kind of like matte side of the Rubylith is up, and then you can pretty much cut out whatever shape you want. And I'm not pressing super hard, just very lightly on the top, because you don't actually want to cut through that clear plastic layer on the bottom. Make sure that your points of like beginning and ending meet, because otherwise you might actually like tear into areas that you don't want to. So I made this shape. I'm just gonna like kind of shove it with my blade and slowly peel it up, and there you have that wonderful shape underneath. And so now this clear area here wouldn't expose, and all this red area, if I were to expose it to a screen, would become a stencil. So when approaching creating the stencil for this project, which I've already done my pink layer. And I was using this as a guide. I cut around all the areas that I wanted to keep pink and left them here because this will block the light, allowing everywhere around it to expose and harden. And then when we wash out the screen, the stencil washes away, and these open areas we are able to print. So when approaching the blue area to cut out, I have my guide here. Cut your Rubylith to whatever size you're going to need. Again, it's good to tape it down so it doesn't move. So I'll tape my prototype down first. Again, make sure that the matte side is facing up. Tape the Rubylith down. And then using my colored sheet as a guide, I will start to remove information. Okay, so I can see I want to cut this away. It's not sticking there. So let's see, for example, this wine glass. I want to cut out the inside of it, but leave this kind of small outline. You want to be careful to not cut away anything that you want to keep. Sometimes the Rubylith, especially if you're doing like really, really tiny detail, will come off because it kind of adheres to the plastic underneath, like almost through a like type of static cling. So I'm gonna remove this part here. So if you find little pieces are coming off, you can actually just get a glue stick and glue them down into place, and that way they'll stay there and not move. So now I'm going to show you this nice little detail, cutting around the glass, keeping that nice thin border. Because the Rubylith is like a little bit tricky to control, you know, we're like relying on cutting methods, that it can yield this kind of beautiful, like expressive quality that you couldn't get if you had actually hand drawn it. And this is, you know, kind of tedious, but also really meditative. You can put a podcast on and just go for it. So a little bit about screens in screen printing. When screen printing was first invented, they used silk. That's why it's called silk screen sometimes. But now we use a polyester mesh. So it's like a screen with different meshes overlapping. And depending on what type of screen you're using, you'll have different mesh types. So this orange mesh is what they call a higher mesh count. So it's probably about 280 mesh count. So that means that the polyester fibers are really close together, and then the white mesh is generally around 180 mesh count, which means that they're a little bit looser. These two are not like so different. The advantages of having a higher mesh count is finer detail. So if you were printing something with like a really fine halftone, such as CMYK, you would want to stick to probably a higher mesh count. A lower mesh count is good for printing things with less detail, so like flats. The yellow mesh is good for high detail. It's also good if you're printing on fabric, because when we print on fabric, we want to put a lot more ink so that it soaks into the fabric, so your lower mesh count is good for printing on fabric. One thing you want to check for when you're selecting a screen is if there's any blockages. So you'll be able to tell a blockage because you can't actually see through it. If you see, you'll be able to see like previous images. These are called ghost images, but as long as you can still see through them, that's okay. Ink will still pass through the screen, but it's those parts where they're completely blocked that you want to pay attention to. Sometimes we need to use like a really heavy duty cleaner to get that out. Otherwise, something you can do is like try to avoid those areas. If there's any holes in the screen, let me know, because I can repair those with epoxy. But basically, you're just looking for any blockages in the screen that could affect your printing capabilities. So there's two sides to the screen. This side is our paper side. So actually, when we're printing, we have it face down like this. There's a bit of a trough on this side, and this is where our ink goes, and then our paper goes underneath, and we print from this side. And you want to be careful around sharp objects. I get really nervous about actually placing my screen face down on any areas that I haven't properly inspected. If you have scissors or like an X-Acto blade, keep them away from the mesh. Because if these get ripped or torn, it's not ideal. We might have to replace them or restretch the mesh, which is no easy task. So please be careful around the screens. They are, they feel sturdy, but they're actually really delicate. Be careful when carrying them around the shop that you don't really bang into anything, and take good care of these so that we don't have to be replacing them all the time. When you're selecting your screen as well, you want to make sure that your image is going to fit within the mesh area with a good like 2 inches at least from the metal border, because it will make it really hard to print if your image goes like really, really close to the metal border. So make sure it sits nicely within this screen part of your frame. So the first thing that you want to do is to coat your screen. This is a good thing to do ahead of time because you have to wait for it to dry. And again, you want to pick a scoop coater that is about 1 inch shorter on either side of your frame, or as big as you can get it without actually touching the frame. So let's see. So this is a good example of a scoop coater that is just slightly too large, because when I press it up against the screen, in some parts, it's like sort of dangerously close to the edge. If I pick a scoop coater and it goes over onto the metal edge, it's going to impede my ability to get a nice even coat on the screen because it'll be riding up against that metal edge. So this one's too big. The next step down is that size. So we're gonna go with this size. And so this is what the scoop coater looks like. This is what we use to apply emulsion. It has this nice like kind of thin edge. Be careful when you're cleaning up to clean this really well, because if there's any dried bits on it or chips, that can affect your emulsion application. So once you've picked your scoop coater, you're ready to put some emulsion in it. Be careful with the emulsion. It's very expensive. There's a lot of different types of emulsion. We have that come in a lot of different colors. We have this nice kind of bubblegum pink one. So I'm just pouring the emulsion into my scoop coater. The emulsion right now is not super full, so it's easy to pour. If it's really, really full, please be careful to not like spread it everywhere because it is really expensive. There are a few bubbles here, so I'm just popping them with my spatula. And you want, you don't want to like overflow the scoop coater, but you want a nice amount, depending on how big your screen is, so that you don't run out halfway up. So the basic action that I'm doing here is I'm going to tip my scoop coater forward once it's against the screen until this emulsion is sort of like touching the edge of the screen along here all the way across. And then once it is touching all the way across, I'm going to evenly and not too slowly, but like a nice like brisk motion, draw it up. When I get to the top, I'm going to, because I'll have it put up like this, when I get to the top, I'm going to let it fall back, let the liquid fall back into the scoop coater, and then scoop up the rest. All right, so just from another angle, and as I'm actually doing it, my screen is actually at a 45-degree angle, butted up against these wooden pieces. That angle helps us apply the emulsion, and this wooden piece stops the screen from sliding, because if you're trying to apply emulsion and your screen's sliding, it's going to be really hard to get an even coat. So I'm holding my scoop coater with my 4 fingers on either side like this, thumbs on top, and I'm starting at like within the mesh part, so not on top of the metal part, and sort of like evenly across. I'm going to tilt my scoop coater, and I'm waiting for that pink stuff to touch all the way across, and then I'm pressing, not super hard, but firmly, slowly moving up. Once I get to the top, I'm going to tilt my scoop coater down, and I'm scooping up that last line. This is actually like a hard thing to do. It takes lots of practice, so don't beat yourself up if you don't get it on the first go. There are ways we can clean it up. You can take the scoop coater and not tilt it towards the screen and just kind of like draw up. You can also take a piece of mat board and just like drag it across, because we do want a nice even coating. So once you coat the front, we're going to turn it around, and you're going to do the exact same thing on the back. So again, starting at the bottom, letting the scoop coater go towards it till all the liquid is across, and then I'm slowly pulling up and then letting it go back in and scooping that last little bit up. Whoop. Got stuck on this handle over here. And then any excess I'm putting back into the scoop coater. And then I'm ready to put the screen in the dark room. It's very important that you put the screen in the dark room to cure. Right now it's not light sensitive, but when it dries it will be. So we're coming into the dark room. And I'm going to put it in front of the fan so that it dries quickly. And you want to give your screen about an hour or so to dry at least, but you can leave it for a couple days if you need. All right, so now our screen is drying, and now we need to clean up our scoop coater. All right, so to clean it up, I'm going to carefully pick it up. We want to save every last drop of this. Please don't forget to clean out your scoop coater, because there's nothing worse than cleaning out hardened emulsion from a scoop coater. So I'm just using the spatula to kind of scrape out all the excess. It's really good till the last drop. And once you've got as much as you can, place the lid back on all the way, because we don't want it to dry out. And then we'll go clean our scoop coat. So if you come to the washout booth and nothing is on, it's probably because all these faucets are in the off position, which is like kind of straight across. When it's in line with the hose, that means that it's on. This is the hot water. This is the cold water for the regular hose, so we're going to turn that on. If you need to turn the pressure washer on, that's this lever here. But we don't need that right now. We're just going to keep the cold water on. All right, so I'm in the washout booth. I've got the hose. It can be a bit stubborn sometimes, so you might need a sponge, but you want to get all this pink stuff off of the spatula and the scoop coater. We've got a couple tougher sponges. Just make sure to clean it off. And I'm just gonna scrub it until all that like wet pink stuff is off. I'm especially checking this edge because we don't want any dried bits of emulsion to get stuck to it. All right, and then after you've cleaned up and your screen has dried, you're ready to expose it.